Please sign this resignation document immediately, or we will terminate your employment right here and now. Those cold, demanding words were spoken to me by a man who had been with our company for less than 6 months. His name was Trent, the newly appointed Vice President of Operations. But before those heavily weaponized words were even spoken, Trent made sure to set the stage for my ultimate humiliation. I had been called up to the top floor executive suite for what his calendar invite vaguely described as a quick operational sync. When I arrived, his assistant didn't show me in. Instead, she coldly instructed me to take a seat in the hallway. I sat on that uncomfortable, rigid leather bench for 45 agonizing minutes. Through the frosted glass walls, I could clearly see Trent pacing back and forth in his lavish office, casually sipping an espresso and laughing loudly on his cell phone. He wasn't busy with corporate emergencies. He was deliberately making me wait. It was a classic, textbook power play. It was a silent, suffocating way of telling a 35-year-old black woman who had single-handedly built his entire department from the ground up that she was now entirely at his mercy. When I was finally allowed inside, I wasn't met with a sync-up. I was met with a corporate tribunal. Trent sat rigidly, flanked by 2 stone-faced HR representatives I had never seen before in my life. After 12 years of dedicated, tireless, life-consuming service to the organization I had helped build from its humble beginnings, I was granted exactly 30 minutes to make a decision that would alter the course of my entire professional life. I was told to sign away my legal rights for a pitiful severance, or be fired on the spot and walk out with absolutely nothing. I looked at Trent. He wore the insufferable, confident smirk of a man who firmly believed he held all the winning cards. But as I boldly reached for the pen, I knew something they didn't. I wasn't just resigning. I was lighting a match. My name is Laila. I am 35 years old, and for 12 relentless years, I was the undisputed operational backbone of Zenith Cloud Solutions. I started my long, arduous journey with the company when I was just 23 years old, fresh out of a grueling MBA program. Back then, Zenith wasn't a shiny corporate entity. It was just a scrappy, desperate tech startup operating out of a leased, poorly ventilated warehouse. I was officially hired as a junior logistics analyst, making a modest entry-level salary that barely covered my rent while working punishing 60-hour weeks. But despite the heavy exhaustion, I absolutely loved it. I poured my entire soul, my weekends, and my youth into that company. Over the next decade, I didn't just quietly climb the existing corporate ladder. I built the ladder itself with my own 2 hands. I personally designed the proprietary vendor management software that consistently saved the company millions of dollars annually. I carefully cultivated fragile relationships with our biggest, most demanding offshore suppliers. I remember when our servers completely crashed on a major holiday weekend. I was the only one sleeping under my cramped desk to manually patch the data bridges while the executives were at their beach houses. By the time I turned 32, I had rightfully earned the prestigious title of Director of Global Supply Chain. My compensation package had grown significantly to match my immense responsibilities, complete with a robust 6-figure base salary, lucrative performance bonuses, and a heavy, vested portfolio of stock options. I was the living, breathing archive of Zenith's complex institutional knowledge. Whenever a confused vice president couldn't figure out why a legacy contract was structured a certain way, my phone was the one that rang. I was respected, valued, and fundamentally essential to their daily operations. I felt entirely secure, deeply believing in the unwritten corporate promise that hard work guarantees safety. I thought I was completely untouchable. protected by my undeniable, measurable value. I was dead wrong, and the impending wake-up call would violently shatter everything I thought I knew about corporate loyalty. The tectonic plates of my stable career shifted precisely 8 months before that fateful, humiliating meeting in Trent's office. Zenith Cloud Solutions was highly profitable and growing exponentially, which unfortunately made us a prime, irresistible target. In early spring, we were formally acquired by Omnicorp Global, a massive, faceless conglomerate famous for aggressively gobbling up mid-sized tech firms. Omnicorp's ruthless acquisition playbook was an open, terrifying secret in the tech industry. They would buy a profitable company, immediately gut the senior checkmate, higher paid staff, and replace them with cheap, inexperienced, desperate new hires to maximize short-term shareholder value. The brand new management team arrived at our headquarters like a conquering, occupying army. They wore perfectly tailored suits, spoke loudly in endless, meaningless corporate buzzwords, and possessed absolutely zero practical knowledge of how our specific, nuanced software ecosystem actually functioned. Leading the arrogant charge into my department was Trent. Trent was 36, a former strategy consultant who looked fantastic on a polished resume, but had never actually managed a complex, real-world supply chain for a single day in his life. He was an absolute master of managing upward flattering the senior executives while simultaneously terrorizing the people below him. On his very first day, Trent called a mandatory, department-wide town hall meeting. I vividly remember standing in the back of the crowded room as he projected a rehearsed, hollow, incredibly fake enthusiasm. "Nothing fundamental is going to change around here," he promised smoothly, flashing a practiced, predatory smile. Omnicorp bought Zenith specifically because of the exceptional talent in this room. We are a family, and your current positions are completely secure. I had been in the brutal corporate world long enough to know the exact translation of those words. Whenever high-level executives go out of their way to loudly promise that nothing will change, it is a mathematical certainty that everything is about to be systematically destroyed. They thought they were bringing in a hungry wolf to easily thin our unsuspecting herd. They didn't realize the herd had been quietly building a slaughterhouse of its own. It didn't take long for the once collaborative office culture to turn incredibly toxic. Within just a month of the acquisition, Trent aggressively began implementing his so-called modernization initiatives. In reality, it was a systematic, highly calculated campaign designed to intentionally undermine the veteran legacy employees, particularly targeting me. It started with subtle, insidious, easily deniable microaggressions during high-level strategy meetings that I used to expertly lead. Trent would intentionally talk over me or blatantly dismiss my critical data. When I presented hard, undeniable numbers that directly contradicted his flawed, theoretical, operational plans, he wouldn't argue the facts. Instead, he would lean back in his expensive leather chair, smirk condescendingly, and say, "Laila, I think you're being a little too aggressive with your pushback today. We really need flexible team players who embrace agility. Aggressive, it was the classic, tired, coded language consistently used against Black women in corporate spaces whenever we dare to be rightfully assertive, highly knowledgeable, and unapologetically competent. He was desperately trying to paint me as the angry, uncooperative, stubborn legacy employee who couldn't adapt to change. He started deliberately excluding me from vital email chains involving my own key, long-term vendors. When I calmly confronted him about it, maintaining strict, unshakable professionalism. He offered a dismissive, patronizing wave of his hand. Just trying to take some tedious work off your heavy plate. Laila, don't worry your head about it. But I was intensely worried. He was slowly, methodically stripping away my visible authority and leadership while conveniently leaving me with all the actual heavy accountability if his terrible plans inevitably went wrong. He soon brought in 2 young, entirely inexperienced analysts, both college buddies from his previous firm, and ordered them to strictly shadow me. I knew exactly what was happening. I was being forcefully coerced to train my much cheaper, less competent replacements. They were aggressively mining my brain for 12 years of hard-earned institutional knowledge so they could brutally discard the empty vessel. He wanted me to break. He desperately needed me to break. But my disciplined silence wasn't surrender. It was a carefully calculated countdown. By month 4 of the oppressive Omnicorp regime, the ruthless corporate purge officially began in earnest. Every Friday afternoon, almost like clockwork, ominous calendar invites would suddenly appear in the inboxes of various senior staff members. A vaguely titled Quick Catch-Up with Human Resources. None of those dedicated professionals ever returned to their desks. In just 6 devastating weeks, they systematically terminated over 20 veteran employees who had literally built the company. The discriminatory pattern was glaringly, undeniably obvious to anyone paying attention. The people being ruthlessly targeted were overwhelmingly women, minorities, and virtually anyone over the age of 50 who was currently making a senior-level 6-figure salary. The Human Resources Department conveniently categorized this mass exodus under the vague, legally safe umbrella of strategic organizational realignment. My fiercely competent employment lawyer and I, however, categorized it exactly for what it was: blatant, systemic, illegal discrimination and targeted constructive dismissal. Following my lawyer's strict, unwavering advice, I became a complete ghost in the corporate machine. I quietly forwarded every suspicious email, every passive-aggressive written directive from Trent, and every documented instance where my established authority was bypassed, directly to a highly secure, encrypted external server. I meticulously saved digital copies of my spotless, glowing performance reviews spanning over a decade. I silently downloaded the complex metadata, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was the sole original architect of the critical vendor systems they were now hopelessly relying on. I built an impenetrable, massive fortress of digital evidence right under their arrogant noses. Trent was growing increasingly, visibly frustrated with my infuriatingly calm demeanor. He desperately wanted me to finally snap. He wanted me to raise my voice in a meeting, to send an emotional, unprofessional email, or to formally refuse a direct task so he could legally fire me with a cause and officially deny my severance. I gave him absolutely nothing, while they were busy celebrating their immediate cost savings and patting themselves on the back. I was quietly locking all the doors from the inside. The trap was perfectly set. Now, I just needed Trent to confidently step on the hidden wire. Since Trent simply couldn't find a legitimate, fireable reason to terminate me, he aggressively decided to set me up for a catastrophic, highly visible public failure. In late summer, Zenith Cloud Solutions was slated to intensely renegotiate our massive manufacturing contract with our absolute largest overseas silicon supplier. This was a delicate, incredibly high-stakes negotiation that I had personally, successfully handled for 6 consecutive years. Suddenly, without any prior warning, Trent arrogantly announced he was taking full point on the critical negotiation, officially relegating me to a silent, powerless consulting role. He marched into the virtual video meetings with the vital supplier acting incredibly arrogant, aggressively demanding an immediate 20% price reduction based solely on Omnicorp's sheer corporate volume. The supplier's leadership, deeply offended by his aggressive, highly disrespectful, and amateurish tactics, immediately threatened to walk away completely. A total loss of this specific supplier would have catastrophically stalled our manufacturing pipeline for at least 6 months, costing the company tens of millions in delayed revenue. Panicking wildly as his unearned confidence completely shattered, Trent quietly dumped the massive, burning mess right back onto my desk on a late Friday evening. "Fix this immediately by Monday," he emailed me, his tone frantic but demanding, "or we will have a very serious, final conversation about your leadership capabilities." He fully expected me to fail. He desperately wanted me to fail, so he finally had his perfect, undeniable scapegoat to justify my termination. Instead, I spent my entire weekend on the phone, bridging time zones with the supplier's executives. I heavily leveraged 12 years of deeply built-up goodwill, intense personal trust, and mutual professional respect to miraculously salvage the massive contract. I brilliantly secured the fragile supply chain and even got them to agree to a modest 5% discount. On Monday morning, I proudly presented the signed binding contract to Trent. He didn't offer a single word of thanks. I saved the company that day. But looking at Trent's furious, resentful face, I realized saving the company was the exact thing that sealed my fate. The final, brutal strike was coming. Exactly 2 weeks after the disastrous overseas supplier incident, Trent eagerly tried a brand new, highly aggressive tactic to finally force me out. He smugly called me into his lavish office again, deliberately making me wait outside in the hallway for 20 humiliating minutes just to establish his perceived dominance. When I finally walked in, he confidently handed me a heavily corporate-worded, legally dense document. Laila, as part of our ongoing critical integration with the broader Omnicorp structure, we are permanently dissolving the Director of Global Supply Chain role. However, we highly value your history here. We're offering you a newly created position, Senior Logistics Coordinator. I carefully looked at the printed paper. The so-called new role completely stripped me of my dedicated team, my essential budget authority, and most importantly, it shockingly came with a massive, devastating 40% pay cut. "This is a strictly entry-level title." "Trent," I said, my voice remaining perfectly level and dangerously calm. "With a nearly 50% reduction in my total overall compensation, it's just the harsh reality of the new market structure." Trent replied smoothly, completely refusing to make direct eye contact with me. "You can gracefully accept the new role, or we can simply part ways right now. Take the weekend to think about it." It was absolute textbook constructive dismissal. They intentionally make your daily work environment so incredibly intolerable, or reduce your established pay so drastically, that you are essentially, legally, forced to quit. By cowardly doing this, they effectively avoid paying the hefty, legally binding severance packages guaranteed to senior leadership during massive acquisitions. I didn't need the weekend to think about it. My brilliant lawyer and I had already wargamed this exact predictable scenario months ago. I went home, drafted my precise response, and prepared for the final showdown. They arrogantly thought a 40% pay cut would easily break my spirit and force a cheap, quiet exit. They had absolutely no idea they had just willingly handed me the master key to the corporate vault. That inevitably brings us right back to the cold, glass-walled conference room on that fateful afternoon, after maliciously letting me wait outside for 45 agonizing minutes. Trent and the two silent HR representatives finally brought me in to deliver their ultimate, unforgiving ultimatum. Since you stubbornly haven't accepted the coordinator role, we are officially transitioning you out of the company, Trent said, slowly sliding a thick manila folder across the polished mahogany table. Inside was the pre-written, highly restrictive resignation letter. The lead HR representative finally spoke up, her tone dripping with rehearsed, utterly fake corporate empathy. Laila, if you sign this resignation document today, we will generously provide exactly 3 weeks of basic severance pay. We'll code it in the system as a voluntary departure. It's a very clean break. If you refuse, we officially terminate you right here, right now, for insubordination and refusing a reassignment. You get absolutely zero severance, and we will permanently note in your official employment file that you were highly uncooperative, which might make background checks for your next job incredibly complicated. 3 miserable weeks of pay for 12 years of my absolute best life, and a subtle, highly illegal threat to deliberately poison my future professional references. They were heavily counting on me being terrified, emotionally exhausted, and deeply intimidated by the unified HR presence. They arrogantly thought the 35-year-old black woman would just meekly take the pathetic scraps and quietly disappear so they wouldn't have to face any annoying legal friction. I will voluntarily resign, I said calmly, deliberately breaking the heavy silence. Trent's rigid shoulders visibly dropped in massive relief. He actually smiled, looking incredibly victorious. A very smart, highly professional choice. Laila. I reached slowly into my tailored blazer pocket, feeling the crisp paper waiting there. 3 weeks of severance, a subtle threat to ruin my entire career. I looked directly at their smug, punchable faces, reached fully into my pocket, and prepared to drop the absolute bomb. I slowly placed my single, flawlessly printed sheet of paper directly onto the polished mahogany table, ignoring their pre-drafted folder entirely. Trent immediately frowned, his confident smile vanishing. We really strongly prefer that you use the standard Omnicorp legal template for compliance reasons. My resignation is absolutely non-negotiable, I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the tense, silent room. You can formally accept my personalized letter right now, or you can legally fire me this very second and explicitly explain to Omnicorp's internal compliance board why you forcefully terminated a protected class employee who literally just saved a $50 million international supply contract a mere 2 weeks ago. Trent's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack under the immense pressure. He angrily snatched my piece of paper, skimmed it quickly with barely contained fury, and sneered at the brevity of it. It simply read, I, Laila, hereby resign from my senior position at Zenith Cloud Solutions. Effective immediately upon the company's full, complete settlement and receipt of all outstanding compensation, vested equities, and binding contractual obligations legally owed to me. Trent laughed, a harsh, incredibly arrogant sound. Fine, whatever. HR will immediately process your 3 weeks of standard severance and your accrued PTO. You can leave your security badge on the desk. And he was so incredibly eager to finally get rid of me, so completely blinded by his own perceived, hollow victory, that he didn't actually process the immense legal weight of the specific words, all contractual obligations, he had just formally accepted on behalf of the massive corporation. I stood up smoothly, placed my plastic badge on the table, and walked out of the oppressive building into the bright afternoon sun, feeling lighter and more powerful than I had in a decade. He smiled broadly as I walked out, arrogantly thinking he had finally won our long war. He didn't know that my meticulously crafted one-sentence letter was a highly active ticking time bomb. and he had just willingly pressed the detonator. Exactly 5 business days later, my cell phone rang. It wasn't the arrogant Trent on the other end. It was the senior corporate legal counsel for the entirety of Omnicorp Global. "Laila," the seasoned lawyer began, desperately trying to sound deeply authoritative but completely failing to hide the absolute suffocating tension in his shaky voice. "We have a massive legal problem with your submitted resignation letter. The specific condition you placed on it, Trent absolutely did not have the executive authority to formally accept this. He is the active vice president of operations, acting as a direct legal agent of the company, and your own human resources department formally signed off on it," I replied smoothly, looking down at the detailed financial spreadsheet my attorney had meticulously prepared. "My formal resignation strictly does not take effect until you fulfill all the binding obligations of my specific executive contract." "What executive contract?" the panicked lawyer demanded loudly. "The one I aggressively negotiated 4 years ago when I officially became director, Section 8, Clause B. In the event of a corporate change of control and subsequent constructive dismissal, my massive portfolio of unvested stock options automatically accelerates and vests entirely. Furthermore, I am legally owed a baseline severance of 1 full year's executive salary, plus a guaranteed legally binding payout of my projected annual bonus." Dead, terrifying silence on the line. Trent, in his blinding arrogance, had never even bothered to read my actual confidential HR file. The lawyer finally cleared his throat, sounding completely defeated. "Laila, the current market value of those accelerated Omnicorp stocks alone is over $2 million. Combined with the severance penalty, you're aggressively asking for nearly $2.5 million. "I'm not asking," I corrected him coldly. "It's exactly what the company legally agreed to when they accepted my terms. We can settle this quietly today, or we can go to federal court. They didn't fight it. They bought my silence for over $2.5 million. Trent was quietly fired a month later. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was knowing that the very system designed to crush me was the exact weapon I ruthlessly used to destroy them.